does it not lessen the blow a bit that you know now that there is going to be a lot of money poured into plenty of road and rail projects, including £12 billion protected to link up Manchester and Liverpool as planned? There's still lots of stuff that's going ahead here.
Yeah, hugely positive updates in terms of continued investment. I guess it's trying to understand what the trade-off is there. If there's a huge amount of investment going into this new Network North, why are we therefore not focusing on continuing the project, the largest infrastructure project in the UK and of our time, continue HS2 to connect the north to the south? The realities are that the opportunities unlocking from Manchester to Bradford in 30 minutes will be hugely different to the level of infrastructure opportunity from Manchester to London. That's the reality.
What do you make of the argument that it's partly due to the pandemic and people do not travel to work as much like they did? I mean, that's been part of the argument, hasn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And look, the pandemic has dramatically changed the way that we live and the way that we therefore commute to work. But ultimately, you know, for me, this level of opportunity to travel down to London and also to challenge the current West Coast Main Line as well, that's a key part of that in the future, is absolutely essential to encouraging people to come back into the offices, back into the city centres.
So was the Prime Minister wrong in the assertion he made that East-West is more important than North-South? Because I think one of the things that you're very concerned with there in Manchester in particular was the freeing up of the West Coast Main Line that HS2 would have provided to get trade and goods traffic onto that main line heading north.
I think it's not really for me to say, is it more important? I think ultimately the decisions being made will naturally be financially driven as well and politically driven. But the fact remains that HS2 was an integral part of a commitment to levelling up and making sure that the north-south divide is reduced. I think naturally that the Network North will be a positive change and further investment's always welcome, but that doesn't change the facts that the leg between now Manchester and Birmingham is now just not going to be high-speed rail. You know, it really completely negates the whole project.
Yeah, and what about then Manchester to Liverpool, a £12 billion link-up, but again, not high-speed rail?
Well, again, you know, the whole point of improving the infrastructure, and I think the high-speed part is often what can blur the lines. This is about infrastructure as well. You know, this is about capacity on the lines and about making sure that there is adequate capacity for people to travel. Also, for us, it's like to commit to a project like this is probably a similar thing where the Londoners were expecting the Elizabeth line and are stuck with the Metropolitan line. You know, we're not looking second best, we're looking for the future. And part of these decisions seem to be more short-term, which inclines that they are probably more politically driven, as opposed to what his slogan was, which is long-term decisions for the future.
Danny, we have heard just quickly about what we're now being told is Network North. That's how we're going to know it from now on. The big question, though, is will it ultimately be deliverable?
It's a good question. And I mean, we'll have to wait and see what the actual plans are and how that's outlined and what the time frame for that is. Naturally, it should be far quicker than what HS2 would have been in terms of the deliverables. And that's part of the benefits, I guess, that the North should expect. But what that looks like, we'll have to wait and see what his plans are.
Danny in Stockport from the Greater Manchester Chambers of Commerce, thank you very much for bringing us your initial reaction. But let's return now to the conference centre and speak to our political editor, Chris Hope. And Danny giving an interesting assessment there of what the fallout may be, Chris, where we've got the Prime Minister saying we have fundamentally wanted to change our country, and yet the fundamental change basically is to switch to the slow line, it seems, in terms of the HS2 at least.
Of course, yeah, the government was saying that's not the case. Network North is being an idea to spend lots of money in the north of England and outside of London trying to connect up those parts. I've been on my phone, Mark and Pippa, texting Andy Street saying you're resigning as either the Tory mayor of the West Midlands or as a party member. No comment yet, so all eyes on Street. What happens next? A coming man, someone who speaks for the Tory party outside of the metropolitan elite, who is a future possible MP. What will he do next? I asked him meeting before the announcement, he said no, I'll wait and see what the PM says. So all eyes on that. I was fascinated there by, I thought it was the way the Tory party can attack its own record, the way he went after the big increase in people claiming benefits, saying how can that happen? What happened on this government's watch? I mean, that's how the Tory party is so fearsomely successful in elections. It attacked its own record and kind of gets away with it. In the hall there, I detected unease about the ban on smoking. I think Tories hate banning things. There certainly wasn't a great cheer there. HS2, not a squeak. One whoop in the hall when that was announced. Otherwise, just applause, but no actual attacking of that from the members. So wait and see. Tory MPs around me saying they're pleased with it, but all eyes on the street right now.
Interesting, you made the assessment about the government's record in terms of having 13 years to fix things. And of course, I guess that plays in with HS2 in terms of that no longer being responsible, HS2 Limited as it was, which was set up with the government to actually get this plan in place.
I know. Well, it sounds like he's going to get rid of all of the management in Euston, that leg between Old Oak Common and Euston, and get that going. That'll be £1 billion more. So you will have this fast line between London and Birmingham, much of it underground because Tory MPs didn't want their views spoiled in southern England, and they can't afford to go north to Manchester. I'm talking to you from a rail shed, by the way, don't forget that. We must also mention Akshata Murthy. Let's not forget that. We have seen the PM's secret weapon emerge today, spoke from notes, no auto cue, her best friend, Rishi Sunak. That is the beginning. Whenever these spouses start to emerge, Mark and Pippa, we know an election is around the corner.
Yeah.
But, Chris, can I just point out that Sarah Brown, Gordon Brown's wife, she made a similar pitch. The year she introduced him, and the following year
didn't turn out well, yeah.
Well, Pippa, of course you're right. You and I remember that very vividly, and that was the moment. But I think that, you know, this weekend that the papers are following this will be a lot of focus on Akshata Murthy. We've heard her speak. I've met her several times privately. She is a genuine person. She is someone who is from a family of service, a very well-off family of service in India. But that is where she comes from. I think that kind of. I think there's a lot of decency about her. I think she is the Sunak, Team Sunak's secret weapon. But all eyes now on Manchester for me. What will Labour do next? Will they say, yes, we will build this leg between Birmingham and Manchester? They will then honour that pledge. Will they do it? Let's wait and see. And also a slight wrinkle, by the way, Mark and Pippa, because in fact MPs have voted to build HS2 between Birmingham and Crewe. Now they have now to pass a vote to reverse that pledge. So Tory MPs have got to vote to axe HS2 Northern Leg, and that will be on every single leaflet that Labour produce in the north of England. Yeah,
and they've got to explain that on the doorstep as and when they start campaigning for that election. But in terms of this sort of preparation for an election, interesting that the ghost of Thatcher perhaps stalking the hall once more. We had this phrase, you know, using the pharmacist's son and the grocer's daughter. What more of a link could you want?
That's right. That's right. I mean, are you talking about Penny Mordaunt there or Rishi Sunak? Because don't forget, Penny Mordaunt will be forgotten now because of the Sunak speech, but she gave an absolutely rip-roaring speech, nearly in tears, name-checking the Falkland Islands conflict, of course, 40 years ago this year, really to channeling that kind of Iron Lady feel. I think it was Akshata Murthy was a helpful bookend of the emotion that Penny Mordaunt brought there. A clear leadership pitch after Swallow Brave in the hall yesterday, and on a lower key speech there from Mr Sunak.
Talking of tears, Chris, did I spot the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, dabbing her eyes? She can't have thought the Prime Minister's speech was that bad, could she?
I was in the hall, so I wasn't watching on TV, so I couldn't see their face. I was behind the cabinet. I couldn't see their faces. No, maybe she was. I also note Gillian Keegan, named Gillian in the speech, was name-checked, along with some other senior Tories, but he didn't name anyone from the right. He mentioned Johnny Mercer by name, Kemi Badenoch, Steve Barclay, Susan Hall, maybe surprisingly, because he's up for election to be maybe replace Sadiq Khan in the mayoral elections in London in May. Gillian Gillian Keegan was named, but no one from the right. This party conference has been all about the battling on the right of the party.
Yeah.
That was a thing which Sunak avoided. I've got to also talk about the small boats briefly. He said that I will do whatever it takes to stop small boats. That, for many in the hall, meant ECHR reform. That is on the table. It was briefed at the weekend papers, and we didn't say ECHR withdrawn the speech, but that's what it's taking to mean. That is on the table again for Rishi Sunak. If Rwanda doesn't work, the case starts in the Supreme Court next month, ruling by the Supreme Court probably November, December.
OK, Chris, thank you for that. We'll let you get back on the phone to Andy Street and see if we can see what's going to happen in terms of his reaction. But let's get more reaction there in Manchester now from our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, who's running his slide rule over the transport and infrastructure plans, because, of course, you've travelled many of these rail lines before, Liam, on your various reports for dispatches. Does Network North add up in your view?
Before I just come to that, Mark, let me confirm that Education Secretary Gillian Keegan was crying. I saw those tears. Our always mischievous GBNews colleague Andrew Pearce tweeted, "Don't cry, Gillian, the speech isn't that bad." But the line that Gillian Keegan made her cry, I must say I thought it was quite a moving line as well, was when Rishi Sunak said, "I'm proud to be the first non-white Prime Minister to lead the United Kingdom," pause, clap, and then he said, "And I'm even more proud that fact is not a big deal." So that was the tearjerker, if you like. And I must say, as somebody from immigrant stock myself, a lot of people who are first and second generation immigrants in the UK will be moved by that line. I say that as a private citizen. But let's get back to Network North, because it was a big deal indeed to scrap the Birmingham to Manchester leg of HS2. The government has already spent somewhere between 25 and 30 billion pounds on the London to Birmingham leg. That's well underway. There's lots and lots of tunnelling going on, as you say. That's why it's so expensive. Those Chiltern-based Tories didn't want their constituents' views ruined. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, confirmed that HS2 from Birmingham to London won't end in Old Oak Common in West London, the suburb of Acton. It will end at the so-called Euston Gateway, a very expansive and rather blingy, if I may say so, terminus in London, Euston. The line from Birmingham to Manchester will be a conventional line, but the same HS2 trains will run on it. They'll have to run more slowly because conventional lines aren't as ramrod straight or as is needed for high-speed rail travel. But I think the really big thing here, and the thing that Labour are going to have to reply to and provide a political answer to, as our colleague Tom Harwood, I think, rightly pointed out earlier, is what would people in the Midlands and the North prefer? Would they prefer 36 billion, the cost of Birmingham to Manchester HS2, of which we've already spent 2 or 3 billion, by the way? The Tories didn't mention that this week. Would they prefer that 36 billion spent on a single train line that stops in no other towns? Or would they prefer that 36 billion spent linking together our great northern cities on trams in Leeds? Leeds, of course, being one of the biggest cities in the world with no proper metro system. Obviously, a proud Yorkshire city, our fifth or sixth biggest city, depending on your definition. Would they prefer it spent on the East Midlands rail hub, on a bespoke rail link between Liverpool and Manchester, really bolstering the economy there, the northwest? And I have to say, as somebody who spent a lot of years looking at HS2, it's a pretty strong argument once you get over the initial shock and embarrassment of the fact that there have been homes compulsorily purchased by the state between Birmingham and Manchester. There's been land bought by the state. There's been preliminary work done. As I've said, 2 or 3 million quid's been spent on this Birmingham to Manchester HS2 link. Once you get over the initial shock of that embarrassment, as Rishi Sunak says, the facts of rail travel have changed. COVID, the pandemic, working patterns have changed. So when the facts change, maybe it's the right thing to change your mind. But be in no doubt, this is a very bold move by Rishi Sunak. There will be many, many critics, but I suspect some people will be silently thinking, yeah, that's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, one of those people won't be Andy Street. And just to touch on one thing very quickly, and that is, of course, that they were saying part of the jigsaw was to free up the West Coast main line by putting these trains on HS2 and therefore a lot more goods and freight traffic on that West Coast main line.
Indeed, that is right. The counter-argument to that would be that with digital signalling, you can fit more trains on
existing track, yeah.
Lines. Of course, this is all about the art of the possible, isn't it? There's compromise here. £36 billion is big money. It's proper moolah, as they say. And if you're going to spend £36 billion on transport, it may be better to have lots of smaller projects that impact local communities more. More money spent on bus routes, as our GB News colleague, the Deputy Tory Chairman Lee Anderson, has been arguing. Spending money here in Manchester, just moments from this conference centre, widening the so-called Castlefield corridor. I'm not even from Manchester. The beloved mother of my children is from Manchester, but I've become pretty obsessed with the Castlefield corridor because it's so crazy. Just near Deansgate, there's part of the track that goes down to just one train line in either direction, and that bottleneck, that blockage, impacts negatively trains right across the northwest of England and all the way up to Scotland. And money has already been allocated in the past several times to broaden that Castlefield corridor, and it's never actually been done. The Department of Transport has always cancelled at the last minute. And yet I know from spending time in this fabulous city of Manchester how important that is to local people, what a symbol of neglect that is, what a symbol of neglect, the fact that so many trains in the north of England, 80% of trains, aren't even electrified, Mark and Pip, which means they're slow, they're not powerful, they can't pull many carriages, they can't accelerate. That means you can't have many of them on the same line. Commuting in and out of our northern cities is a nightmare for many, many people. You can't even get on the trains sometimes because they're so overcrowded. And so if this money turns into reality, and that, of course, is the thing, people will say, why should we believe you, Mr. Sunak? Because, half an hour ago, your party was promising HS2. Yeah. So, look, it's all to play for. I think for now, at least, the Prime Minister's put an argument out there trying to justify the scrapping of the Birmingham-Manchester link of HS2, and we'll see how it pans out, and we'll see, crucially, how Labour respond. Indeed. Liam, thank you for that. Well, he's promised a tram for Leeds. We'll be live in Leeds shortly to find out what they make of that and whether they trust the government's promises. First, the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Mark, thank you. It's 1:32, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has announced the scrapping of the Birmingham to Manchester leg of HS2. Speaking after weeks of speculation, Rishi Sunak told the Conservative Party conference in Manchester that he's taken the decision other leaders should have taken.
We will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation.
The Countess of Chester Hospital is under investigation for corporate manslaughter. It follows Lucy Letby's murder convictions, the former nurse jailed for life after killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others at the hospital's neonatal unit. Cheshire Constabulary confirmed it's focusing on the indictment period between June 2015 and 2016. It says it's considering areas including senior leadership and decision-making to determine whether any criminality has taken place. A murder investigation's been launched after a dog believed to be an XL bully killed a man in Sunderland. Police responded just before 7 o'clock last night following reports a dog had injured a 54-year-old. A 44-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. The dog was destroyed at the scene. A second has been seized. A 19-year-old soldier is believed to have taken her own life after relentless sexual harassment by one of her bosses. An armour investigation has found Royal Artillery gunner Jaisley Beck was found dead at Larkhill Camp in Wiltshire in December 2021. The report describes an intense period of unwelcome behaviour and says it's almost certain this was a casual factor in her death. And in some breaking news, the Reclaim Party says Lawrence Fox has been arrested. Earlier, he posted a video on social media saying his house was being searched by police. It's understood an arrest was made on suspicion to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2130 and €1.1554. The price of gold is £1,505.74 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,473 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk. So, HS2 as it was is no more, certainly that northern link from Birmingham to Manchester, but we have something called Network North coming down the track, which includes a tram service for Leeds.
So let's find out what people there think about this. Correspondent Anna Riley is in Leeds for us. Good afternoon to you, Anna. What are people's reactions then to what they heard in Rishi Sunak's speech?
Good afternoon, Pip and Mark. Well, there was much speculation before this announcement was made at the conference, wasn't there, about the HS2 leg being scrapped. Here in Leeds, it was quietly cancelled 2 years ago, but northern mayors were very disappointed with the potential of this other leg being cancelled for HS2. We know that Andy Burnham, he said that it made the people in the north like second-class citizens. Tracy Brabin, she is the mayor for West Yorkshire. She said this was a step backwards to cancel this leg of HS2, and we know Andy Street, the Tory mayor of West Midlands, had previously pleaded with the Prime Minister not to ditch this leg and saying it would mean cancelling the future, and warned that Britain's credibility in the eyes of global investors was now at stake. So that's what the mayors in the north and the mayor in the Midlands has said. But what about people here on the ground? Well, certainly in the north we have had difficulties with bus services running, whether they're on time or not, and having a regular train service. We know that ASLEF, the Train Drivers Union, is on strike today, so many trains, not just in the north but across the country, are cancelled due to that strike action. But on regular days where trains are running, people do struggle with the capacity. There's not often enough trains running that people can get on, and they're not always on time. I went out speaking to people in Leeds about what they think to the transport network here and what they want that £36 billion spent on that's now free, what they want to happen with that money, and this is what they had to say.
In terms of buses, I think the transport is quite good, but I think the trains can be improved a little bit more, and I think transport's quite good. First Bus has done a good job. I think it should go towards better, maybe train links between like Leeds and Newcastle, because Manchester and Leeds are not really the north, they're more like the middle of England. We also need to focus on like Middlesbrough, Newcastle, and maybe parts of Scotland as well, because I think most of the attention is focused more towards London. But I think, yeah, definitely, because like Leeds and Manchester and Liverpool, they're all good in terms of economy, so I think they need to be focused on a little bit more, and especially links towards Newcastle as well.
It's a bit rubbish. The buses are always late, or they just don't turn up, so when you're trying to get to like school or college or work or anything like that, it's a bit rubbish to get to. Like, yeah, obviously I'm in college quite far away because I'm at the other side of Leeds. It takes forever to get there, and if buses are late, I'm late for college for about an hour because it's an hour between each bus.
Well, I mean, I think the money should go more into like the NHS and schools and that, just because it's like education's horrible around here. I can't deal with it because obviously HS2 it's supposed to like get rid of the north-south divide, but it's not really doing all for it because no one really goes down London from here anyway.
Actually, it's very good. I feel very fortunate and I feel very lucky in that we have a bus stop just outside our front door, and I can get a bus sort of every 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most. And going back home, it's the same. So I have no complaints at all.
Well, one satisfied passenger or customer at least there, Anna. I think I counted 3 buses on the move there in the background when you were doing those vox pops. So tell us what people understand as to what the tram system would do if and when it is built, and how that would improve the system within the city.
Well, we've not had much more information, have we, from the Prime Minister on exactly what the tram network would be in Leeds. We do know, though, that it's one area in Europe, one of the major cities, that doesn't have a tram network to connect the city itself, the city centre, and out to smaller towns surrounding as well. At the moment, I don't know if you can hear construction work going on. Leeds is currently a bit like a building site itself, so it will certainly bring more congestion while it is built. But of course, in the long term, we know it works fantastically in places like Manchester. It's got a great tram network for people to get around, and Sheffield as well also has a great one. And we know up in Newcastle as well, that has its own underground system that works really well, reducing that congestion on the road. So certainly people will be looking forward to seeing what the tram network brings here in Leeds, and also those other pledges as well that the Prime Minister has made, saying a fully electric line would see trains from Manchester to Hull in 84 minutes, to Sheffield in 42 and to Bradford in 30 minutes, protecting that 12 billion project to link Manchester and Liverpool, building a Midlands rail hub to connect 50 stations, as well as that tram in Leeds, and for road users as well, upgrading the A1, A2, A5 and the M6.
But key, as you said, no details as yet on what the tram system will be, or indeed how much that will cost. But Anna, in Leeds, thanks very much for updating us there in the building site of the city centre.
Transport Secretary Mark Harper, he has been speaking, and he says that some of the money that will be redirected away from HS2 to other transport projects in the north will be available sooner rather than later. Says we'll be working closely with mayors in the north and in the Midlands of all political parties to deliver for the people that we all seek to serve. Did he mention Andy Street by any chance? He did not mention Andy Street, but we know Rishi Sunak mentioned Andy Street several times, didn't he?
Yeah, and Christopher Hope, our political editor, is trying to track him down and get his reaction to that cancelling, of course, of that northern leg of HS2.
Well, staying with transport in the north of England, because delegates are now on their way home from their conference in Manchester, but not sure they're going to be able to get home by train, because train drivers belonging to the ASLEV union have returned to the picket line in their ongoing dispute over pay and conditions.
Well, indeed, drivers from some 16 train companies across the country on strike, many parts having no services at all today, and those that are running starting later and finishing earlier than usual. Let's get the latest with Jack Carson, who's outside Manchester Piccadilly station, which would be fairly busy on a day like today with a conference, but pretty empty at the moment. And I guess the other thing is Jack, what they're saying in reaction to the news on HS2 from the conference centre.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the row of taxis that are lined up just in front of me certainly wouldn't be here on a usual day here at Manchester Piccadilly. Certainly not, of course, on the last day of such a big event like the Conservative Party conference with delegates and of course, members of Parliament using the trains and the networks to get, of course, back to their constituencies and back to London. Now, if you're a Welsh Conservative, you're going to have some luck here at Manchester Piccadilly because, of course, Transport for Wales aren't one of the networks that are on strike today. So if you're one of the Welsh Conservatives, you can easily get a train back to Cardiff from here this afternoon. But of course, for other services across the country, like the situation across the country with ASLEF going on strike, of course, it does mean that you are going to struggle to get a decent service today. But the ASLEF union saying that there is one easy way to end this, and that is by coming back to the table. They've been having posters at their picket line today that says, "Where's Wally? Where's Harper?" Of course, in reference to the fact that they haven't met Mark Harper for a matter of months. They haven't met Hugh Merriman, the Transport Minister, since January, and they say they can't put that offer, and they're not going to put that offer of a 4% backdated pay rise for 2022 and a 4% pay rise for 2023 to their members, because it was only in May, of course, that they voted again to redo this strike action for another further 6 months. So they say that's a mandate enough to say that our members won't accept that offer on the table. But Mark Harper's saying that we're not going to really come back to the table, of course, until you put that offer to your members. So it's a stalemate here, and lots of talking, strong talking from each side, but no kind of talking together. But I have been doing the talking here in Manchester today, but to people on the street, because of course that big announcement from Rishi Sunak, particularly of course cancelling that leg of HS2 to Manchester, I've been speaking to them to find out their reaction. Here's what they told me.
It needs to be kept open because obviously they've invested so much billions in the infrastructure to get that line up and running. The problem you have, and we see this time and time again, whichever government's in power, The people that are doing the HS2 and the HS1 and all the other infrastructures are private companies. They want as much profit for as little amount of work as they could possibly get. What about the fact that that money's being wasted? That money could go on better and bigger projects, maybe building more affordable housing for people.
I think it's really, really bad. I think all the wealth is going down to London, and all the people in London are getting rich, and the people in the north are getting poorer, and they need to level up properly, and they need to keep that line going. Why waste all that money starting something when they should finish it off? And I think it's a disgrace, actually, and I think they just want to keep them rich down there and us poor up here. And why are you coming to Manchester for? Because at the end of the day, people in Manchester don't want you, and really your Conservative government shouldn't be in government at all.
It's ridiculous. I mean, we have more strikes and soft mick at the moment, and trains are essential. I don't think you should do that because it's penalising the north yet again, and we've got to have good rail services. They've done the rest of it over budget, so what's the difference?
The Voices of Manchester there speaking to you a little earlier, Jack. And of course, in the immediate term, the question is how all those delegates, including all the MPs and cabinet ministers, are going to get home or get back to where their constituencies are from Manchester. I guess they're going to have to head in cars or even planes or helicopters.
Yeah, of course, we know the Chancellor decided to fly into the conference, didn't he? Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, opting for those cars, of course. Maybe they'll do a little bit of a tour around some of the roads that, of course, they've promised in his big speech today to, of course, improve things, roads like the M6, of course, key road networks all the way from the Midlands up to Manchester. But as, of course, you were also hearing from the people of Manchester here, they feel a little bit let down by the fact that that leg of HS2 has been cancelled. Of course, there will be some good reception for Network North here, particularly, of course, for those northern MPs, those northern Conservative MPs, those Red Wall MPs that, of course, I'm sure will in future be using those local electrified transport systems. But for today, Manchester might well get a little bit busy in a couple of hours' time as all those delegates head home.
OK, Jack, at Manchester Piccadilly for the moment. Thank you for updating us on that. Just a bit more reaction coming in. This is from the former Tory Treasury Minister, Lord O'Neill, Jim O'Neill, crossbench peer now, in terms of the cancellation of the HS2 scheme and what's been put in its place, this so-called Network North. He said it's very easy for him, i.e. Rishi Sunak, to stand there and say all these things and then just presume everyone forgets about it in another few months. He is the Prime Minister of a party that the past 13 years hasn't delivered on any other commitments, including by the way of electrification, which is what he really focused on. That's been said by them many times before, and they haven't. A former Treasury Minister, indeed.
Well, something else Rishi Sunak talked about was the NHS, and he was hailing the government's long-term workforce plan. He also said that strikes by junior doctors and consultants that are happening at the moment are all about politics.
Well, of course, featuring on focusing rather on the record high waiting list, but the British Medical Association saying that hospitals have not been appropriately rescheduling non-urgent elective activity, i.e. trying to cope with the aftermath of the strike. So let's get some reaction now from a junior doctor, Dr. Basha Mukherjee, who can join us. Thank you very much indeed for your time. And clearly the current sort of strike action, combined consultants and juniors coming to an end. What's your assessment? Because I think you've actually decided that you're going to leave the BMA for the moment. Is that right?
Yes, I have just cancelled my BMA membership, and that actually is purely for the purpose of the fact that it's not worth for me to pay £30 a month. The BMA gave a 3-month holiday for monthly fees. And this goes back into the conversation about doctors not being compensated well for all the fees that add up, including indemnity fees, exam fees, and the various other things alongside, living costs. So I think, the conversation is not about why I'm leaving BMA, whether it's got to do with BMA itself, but it's actually more to do with not having enough funds to do it.
So do you still support these strikes that are taking place then?
Well, 100%. And I would say that even if you're not a member of the BMA, you can still be a part of the strike motion, because ultimately it's about, we all believe in the same thing, which is that we're not being well compensated for all these years. And I think you know, it goes beyond the job. It goes beyond just the working hours. I've been, since the age of 15, I've been preparing, you know, in terms of doing voluntary work and exams and studying, all this towards medicine. And the rewards are just not matching up to the demands of the job.
Right. And that raises another question, Basha, and that is how long can the doctors carry on this industrial action if they're losing pay by going out on strike, bearing in mind what you said about, you know, how tight things are for you?
Yes, absolutely, and I think that's where the personal sacrifice is coming in. You know, we've heard of the carrot and the stick method, and I think for very long we've been facing the stick. We've been doing our job with our heads down, hoping to not get in trouble, because we also face a very high, you know, level of litigation for our role. We have to do everything properly. We can't just do it half-heartedly.
Right.
Otherwise, there are real consequences. And I think we've come to the point, for me personally, where it's just a case of the stick just doesn't hurt anymore.
Okay.
What are the consequences of that? Well, you know, we're just thinking about, well, if we don't get what we want, then we're just going to leave.
Basha, we're out of time. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us your view. More coming up at the top of the hour. Stay with us on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a north-south split with the weather today. Wet for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland. Most of England and Wales dry under the influence of high pressure. Further north, weather fronts draping their way and bringing a soggy feel to much of central southern Scotland and the north of Northern Ireland. That rainy zone lingering well into the evening. Perhaps we'll see some wet weather into the far north of England. Much of northern Scotland actually turning dry and clear, and here it'll actually turn a little chilly with temperatures well down into single figures. For much of the rest of the UK, temperatures holding up in double digits. We start Thursday then with quite a lot of cloud, certainly for North Wales, northwest England. There'll be some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. For Northern Ireland, it's going to turn into a pretty soggy morning fairly quickly, the rain moving in here and then pushing into western Scotland as well. The winds will start to increase. So turning wet and windy across North Wales as well as northwest England. Northern Ireland actually turning a bit drier through the afternoon. Southern and eastern parts of England mostly dry and bright. A bit of sunshine could poke through, and that'll see temperatures up to 19 degrees. Elsewhere, we're in the mid-teens at best. Weather fronts continue to bring further rain across northwest Scotland. That could cause some issues by the time we get to the weekend. But further south, look at this. Temperatures on the rise. High pressure moving in. A lot of fine weather as we head into the weekend for England and Wales. And temperatures this weekend could be in the mid-20s.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, it is 2 o'clock and you are with the Live Desk here on GB News. Coming up this Wednesday afternoon.
The Prime Minister addresses the party conference announcing the northern leg of HS2 is scrapped. Instead, he says, he'll be investing the 36 billion saved in other transport projects now called Network North. It includes a tram link in Leeds.
There were other big policy statements too. On the NHS, he aims to raise the smoking age by 1 year every year to tackle the UK's biggest preventable cause of death. We'll have reaction and analysis of his whole speech.
Meanwhile, all the party delegates turning their attention to trying to get home as ASLEF train drivers are out on strike over pay, including in Manchester Piccadilly. We'll have an update on the dispute too.
Plus, history made in the United States as House Speaker Kevin McCarthy is ousted from office, marking the first time ever that representatives have voted out the Speaker. We'll get the latest from Washington, D.C.
And we'll be looking ahead to what's expected to be a scorcher of a weekend. Temperatures, scorcho. Parts of the UK set to be hotter than Ibiza. Yes, it's true, says the Met Office. First, the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Mark. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 2. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has confirmed the northern leg of HS2 is being scrapped. Speaking after weeks of speculation, Rishi Sunak told the Conservative Party conference in Manchester that he's ready to make tough decisions for the country. He's defended the move, saying the money will be better spent developing projects in the North and the Midlands. HS2 will still run to Euston in central London, but current management will no longer be responsible for the site.
We will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation.
The Countess of Chester Hospital is under investigation for corporate manslaughter. It follows Lucy Letby's murder convictions, the former nurse jailed for life after killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others at the hospital's neonatal unit. Cheshire Constabulary confirmed it's focusing on the indictment period between June 2015 and 2016. It says it's considering areas including senior leadership and decision-making to determine whether any criminality has taken place. A 19-year-old soldier is believed to have taken her own life after relentless sexual harassment by one of her bosses. An army investigation has found. Royal Artillery gunner Jaisley Beck was found dead at Larkhill Camp in Wiltshire in December 2021. The report describes an intense period of unwelcome behaviour and says it's almost certain this was a causal factor in her death. A murder investigation has been launched after a dog believed to be an XL bully killed a man in Sunderland. Police responded just before 7 o'clock last night following reports a dog had injured a 54-year-old. A 44-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. The dog was destroyed at the scene. A second has been seized. The Reclaim Party says Lawrence Fox has been arrested. Earlier, he posted a video on social media saying his house was being searched by police. In a statement, Scotland Yard said a 45-year-old man was arrested on suspicion to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras. Fuel retailers have dismissed claims drivers are being overcharged at the pumps following a surge in prices. RAC data shows diesel shot up by more than 8 pence a litre in September. That's the 5th biggest monthly increase since the turn of the century. Unleaded also rose nearly 5 pence per litre to 157p. The motoring group's blaming the hikes on production cuts by the OPEC group of oil-producing nations and a weakening of the pound against the dollar. Turkey has withdrawn its bid to host the 2028 Euros, meaning a joint bid by the UK and the Republic of Ireland now stands unopposed. Italy and Turkey have agreed to merge bids for 2032. The joint bid needs to be officially approved by UEFA's Executive Committee next week. 10 stadiums are selected, including Glasgow's Hampden Park, the Principality Stadium in Cardiff, Dublin's Aviva Stadium and Wembley in London. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now back over to Mark and Pip.
Rhiannon, thanks very much and welcome back to the live desk with, of course, that keynote speech by the Prime Minister to bring the Tory party conference to an end in Manchester. Rishi Sunak receiving, well, it was a standing ovation after that speech, closing the conference with Education Secretary Gillian Keegan, even moved to tears. Yes.
Yeah, she was indeed. And the Prime Minister's speech, actually, was some half an hour longer than his predecessor's Liz Truss last year. The Prime Minister confirmed that the northern leg of HS2 would be scrapped, saying that to continue out of embarrassment would be an abdication of leadership. The RMT union, meanwhile, are calling it a disastrous decision and have accused the government of playing political games ahead of an election.
But the Prime Minister also announcing a crackdown on smoking, particularly for young people, and promising to raise the smoking age by 1 year every year to create a smoke-free generation. But plenty of smoke being created on the political scene. Let's get more from Manchester and our political editor, Christopher Hope, who was following the events there. Christopher, we got Network North replacing HS2 effectively, all these schemes across the north. But already it's interesting, we've got reaction from Lord Jim O'Neill, of course a crossbench peer now, but a former Tory Treasury Minister, effectively saying, well, we've heard all this before.
That's right. Jim O'Neill, of course, is a key part of the Northern Powerhouse project with George Osborne. That's the idea of connecting up these northern cities, east and west. A brilliant idea, but why not have them linked between Manchester and Birmingham? That almost a bridge to the north doesn't exist now. Instead, this government has spent billions of pounds tunnelling under the south to save the views of southern Tory MPs. They've got to the point where they need to try and connect the north, and guess what? It won't happen. It's a dreadful look for the government, but Rishi Sunak feels he's being brave here by taking this choice now. Looking at the costings, they will connect Old Oak Common 6 miles out of London to Euston. They're getting rid of the team there, bringing a new team, a new company to make that happen. 3 command papers published this lunchtime to make that happen, so lots of thoughts gone into it. The choice was made this morning by the Cabinet. They met for 45 minutes. We're told no one opposed this. In the hall just a few moments ago, we saw that being announced. No booing, the odd whoop. Most activists were happy about the idea of spending more money, billions more, in the north of England, but not on HS2. But I wonder whether by the weekend that'll be the same.
Is this a real moment now for Rishi Sunak, Chris, do you think? You know, this is the starting gun fired ahead of the general election in a year's time?
Well, Pippa, I think so. And for me, it wasn't so much as the speech as what came before, because Akshata Murthy, that's the wife of Rishi Sunak, made an extraordinary political speech. Last time we saw that, of course, was with Gordon Brown in 2009, as you both remember. Of course, that went on to a defeat of the Labour Party at that election. But the hope for the Tory party is that that won't be the case. Now, we've been told that we'll see more of Akshata Murthy. The partnership they have, clearly a very close friendship. They first met when they were 24, 25 on a university in America. That will be seen as this power couple. I think what the weekend papers will be talking about ahead of the Tory conference is the emergence of Akshata Murthy as a real political force, and can she save and bring a human face to the kind of robotic nature, in part, of Rishi Sunak.
And, of course, we've got Labour then next week in terms of this build-up to a general election. Interesting that we've already got reaction from Labour's National Campaign Coordinator, Pat McFadden. And he's observed members of his cabinet spent this week jockeying for position to replace him, while Liz Truss, Nigel Farage and the conspiracy theories lifted from the darkest corners of the internet have dominated the conference. I mean, the attack lines are all, being established already, aren't they?
That's right, there's no question this conference has been dominated by the right. I noted that in the speech there, Mr Sunak did not name any right-wing candidates to replace him. He talked about other Tory ministers, Gillian Keegan, Kevin Badenoch, Steve Barclay and others, but no one from the right. I'm thinking of Suella Braverman, even Penny Mordaunt. She gave an extraordinary speech, moved to tears, reminded of the sacrifice of our troops in the Falklands War 40 years ago this year. That was a passionate speech, I think, and it really did set the place alight. That was broken by the Akshata Murthy speech. Other measures announced today: this ban on smoking. If you're 14 years old, they're going to increase the age so you can't actually even buy cigarettes legally from 18 upwards. That ban may or may not come before the election, and they're not sure yet. It should be in the Queen's speech. A plan to scrap these 3 A-levels we've all taken when we were younger, to replace them with 5. That will take well over a decade to bring in, because the need to hire more teachers, give them bonuses of up to £30,000 and try and get more teachers in to make that happen. So these are long-term ideas, much of which will go past the election and past the election after that one. Yeah. And that's they're trying to show an idea of Sunak seeing a vision, a long-term vision here.
Also, he spoke, as we would have expected, about immigration, Chris, and said that when we're confident that when the flights start going regularly to Rwanda, the boats will stop coming. We will do whatever is necessary to stop the boats. Was that not another hint that he is prepared to leave the European Convention on Human Rights?
Well, Pippa, I asked that, knowing you'd asked me that question right now, I asked that very question of number 10 Downing Street about 10 minutes ago. They were not clear on what that meant. At the weekend, of course, we saw those 3 cabinet ministers came out, Michael Gove, Kevin Badenoch, Suella Braverman, all saying that leaving the ECHR must be on the table. And I said, knowing you'd asked that, Pippa, will it be on the table? They wouldn't go there. The PM wants to try and flex what the ECHR means. That's what the Strasbourg court case is about with Rwanda, the Rwanda flights they want to start. That case starts next month, reports back in November. They're hoping they can flex how you apply the European Convention of Human Rights to allow this to take place. They didn't leave in the ECHR. I asked that question for you. It wasn't answered.
And we have to ask you, has Andy Street, the Tory Mayor of West Midlands, returned your phone calls yet?
Not yet. It's been, what's the time now? It's nearly 15:15.
Been a while.
An hour and 3/4 and counting. It's an ominous silence.
Right, OK. Back to you as we get more, but let's then bring in our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, on that, because, Liam, obviously, in terms of Andy Street's reaction, it's to sort of cast his assessment of the damage, as he was indicating, the cancellation of this link from Birmingham to Manchester, the HS2 link, will be doing without, obviously, the high-speed line.
Well, I know Andy Street pretty well, and he's a formidable character. This is a guy who started out as a shop assistant at John Lewis and ended up as CEO of one of our flagship retail chains. So he knows all about business, he knows all about cutting deals and jeopardy, and I imagine he will be in negotiation right now with the Prime Minister and his aides, because if Andy Street, a very well-respected person in this part of the country, the North and the Midlands, he's a big figure in Birmingham, of course, West Midlands Mayor, he's got cross-party support in many ways. If he now resigns and goes off in a huff, that will really undermine the picture that Rishi Sunak is trying to paint, the deal that Rishi Sunak is trying to put on the table, the political challenge, as Tom Harwood rightly described it, that the Prime Minister is trying to pose to Labour. And the challenge is this: if we don't spend £36 billion on Birmingham to Manchester high-speed rail, but we do have those HS2 trains running on conventional tracks from Birmingham to Manchester, and we then use that £36 billion on things like, a tram system in Leeds, a Liverpool to Manchester bespoke rail route, the East Midlands hub, other fixes and unblocking of pinch points on the rail network, electrification of trains in the North and the Midlands, where disgracefully so many trains are still diesel trains that are slow, lacking in power and acceleration. So they're short, few carriages, lots of congestion on those trains and overcrowding. If Andy Street accepts publicly that Rishi Sunak has a point and there is some logic in what he is doing, then Rishi Sunak will have a much easier time of selling that vision across the Conservative Party, the political class and the population as a whole. But if Andy Street, in a high-profile way, goes off in a huff, as I say, somebody who's very well known across the Midlands and the North, and as near to a national figure as a regional mayor can get, as is Andy Burnham, of course, as in Manchester, as is Ben Houchen in the Tees Valley in the North East. So Andy Street's verdict on this really matters to Rishi Sunak, and so that is why he's not returning Chris calls at the moment, because he's negotiating with the Prime Minister, I suspect.
Yeah, and of course he was mentioned, I think, 3 times in the Prime Minister's speech as well.
Andy Street, just looking at what he tweeted only 24 hours ago, or what should I say, X'd yesterday, he said, I will not let HS2 go without a fight. Which, that's pretty telling, isn't it?
It is pretty telling, but if you let something go without a fight and you come out of the fight with something else, you can keep your head held high. Andy Burnham did exactly the same thing as Andy Street has done. Obviously, Andy Street is a Tory regional mayor in the West Midlands. Andy Burnham is a Labour Greater Manchester mayor here in the North West. Andy Burnham's been briefing the papers over the last couple of days that if Birmingham to Manchester HS2 goes, I am negotiating with the Prime Minister to secure other transport spending for the North in order to compensate. And that's why, Andy Burnham's been out and about here at the Tory party conference, unusually. And that's why the Prime Minister was basically love-bombing Andy Street in his speech, as you say, multiple mentions. In terms of how this goes down with the broader public, I do think, having spent many, many years examining the case for HS2, and I know many, many people in the rail industry who don't work for HS2, who think HS2 is a terrible idea. You don't need high-speed rail in a relatively small country. You can spend the money in a lot better ways. I think while the opposition to Sunak's move to scrap the Birmingham to Manchester HS2 line, there will be vociferous opposition. There will be many lobby groups and business groups who are invested in the idea of HS2 who will complain very, 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 very loudly. But I think there will also be a lot of people, perhaps what you might call in politics a silent majority, who will think, well, as long as we get these other things, then there may be something in what Sunak is trying to say.
And that's a key question, isn't it, Liam? What they call Network North now, in terms of all these other schemes. And we've got Lord Jim O'Neill, crossbench peer, Tory Treasury Minister at one time, and a well-known economist, of course, saying, well, that the proof of the pudding is going to be, will these other schemes be delivered, and when?
See, that's very, very interesting. I know Jim O'Neill well. He's a very proud Mancunian, a big Man United fan, by the way, former chief economist at Goldman Sachs. Again, a very sophisticated, not just economist, but also somebody who's operated at the highest level of business and indeed politics. And if you can come away with a deal, then everyone can move on. and the poison can be drawn out of this situation. So again, Andy Street says, I'm not giving up without a fight. What is he going to get in return? Is Jim O'Neill going to get so-called HS3, the TransPennine upgrade that he's been talking about literally for 20 or 30 years? I must mention here on GB News, Mark and Pip, one other group of people who will be absolutely outraged about this scrapping of HS2 Birmingham to Manchester, and no amount of negotiation, no amount of other schemes, no amount of recompense will ever mollify them. That is the hundreds of families whose homes have been compulsorily purchased by the state in order to make way for HS2 Birmingham to Manchester. A lot of people have had their lives uprooted. There's been an awful lot of complaints that the compensation for moving home hasn't been nearly enough. There's been lots of complaints, though HS2 company will deny them, of not particularly decent treatment of some of these families.
Very good point.
Remember, when politicians make decisions and then they unmake the decisions and they change their minds, the big picture, the macro picture can often make sense. But the small people on the ground, ordinary families who have had their lives uprooted, often adamantly against their will, we should just spare a moment as we're discussing the high politics of this. Let's spare a moment for them.
Very good point to make on the People's Channel. Liam in Manchester, thanks very much indeed for that.
Well, we can bring you more reaction from the Prime Minister's speech from two Cabinet Ministers, Kemi Badenoch and Claire Coutinho. Here are their thoughts.
So, first of all, we can't be distracted by people who are on the sidelines disgruntled. We've got to listen to what the people in this room are saying, not the people who don't want to be in this room. And the fact is, Prime Minister has stood up there and done something that is very brave. He'd said, we have been looking at the wrong things for 30 years. Lots of different parties, different politicians have been making decisions for the short term. He's making them for the long term. What he announced today is going to deliver not just for tomorrow, but for decades to come. Those three policies are going to change people's lives for good, and that's why I'm really proud. I'm not going to get into the details of which station is going to have what. Network North is changing something. It's changing one simple project into one that delivers for people all across the north of the UK.
Well, look, I think the really important thing to remember is that actually post-COVID, the way that people are using the trains has completely changed. So if you look at the legs of HS2 that he's talked about shifting into the Network North programme, actually people haven't come back to that train line in the way that we thought. So in terms of business travel, because of things like Zoom, we know post-pandemic the way people are doing business has changed. That hasn't recovered in the way that we had thought it would before the pandemic and all of those changes that have happened across society. So now what we're going to do is spend every single penny that was going to be spent in the north in terms of HS2 and the Midlands. Every single penny is being invested in those areas, but into a programme of transport which is going to make a real difference to people, which reflects the way that they are travelling now.
So that's the picture in Manchester. What's the picture in Leeds? We'll be, well, zipping over there or chugging over there? What's the speed, we wonder? Because we are awaiting a tram system for that city. When and where? We'll be updating you in a moment. Stay with us. The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the live desk here on GB News. We're getting more reaction to this decision to cancel the northern leg of HS2. The CBI is saying that it sends a damaging signal to global investors and stalls the progress for many businesses in the Midlands and North who have spent the last decade planning for its delivery.
And you won't be surprised to learn that Labour's response from Shadow Transport Secretary Louise Haigh is a staggering Tory fiasco that's seen costs soar and the North and Midlands left to pay the price. Only after 13 years of dismal failure, she said, could the Conservatives make the centrepiece of their conference a re-announcement of promises the Conservatives have made before.
Well, let's get some reaction in Leeds, heading up to Leeds Station and speaking to GB News' Yorkshire and Humber reporter Anna Riley. Are there a lot of sweeteners for people there, Anna?
Well, there certainly needed to be, didn't there? We've already heard rumours before the official announcement about the cancellation of the Manchester HS2 leg. So certainly that sweetener was needed from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, especially heading up to the election if he wanted to get the votes in the north. Certainly transport has always been a talking point here in the north, whether you're waiting for a bus, whether bus lines have been cancelled or whether the train services are running. We know that they aren't today for the majority due to strikes from ASLEF, the train drivers union. But on a normal day, people do struggle in the north to get that, not just connectivity with other cities like going to Manchester, going to Hull, but also local routes as well with cancellations. And a big take here in Leeds, of course, is the announcement that they'll be getting this tram tram network. It was 1959 that Leeds last had a tram network, and it's one of the biggest cities in Western Europe not to have one. So certainly people here pleased with that announcement. I also spoke to people just to find out what they thought to transport here and what they wanted that £36 billion spending on, and this is what they had to say.
In terms of buses, I think the transport is quite good, but I think the trains can be improved a little bit more. And I think transport's quite good. First Bus has done a good job. I think it should go towards better, maybe train links between like Leeds and Newcastle, because Manchester and Leeds are not really the north, they're more like the middle of England. We also need to focus on like Middlesbrough, Newcastle, and maybe parts of Scotland as well, because I think most of the attention is focused more towards London. But I think, yeah, definitely, because like Leeds and Manchester and Liverpool, they're all good in terms of economy, so I think they need to be focused on a little bit more, and especially links towards Newcastle as well.
It's a bit rubbish. The buses are always late, or they just don't turn up. So when you're trying to get to like school or college or work or anything like that, it's a bit rubbish to get to. Like, yeah, obviously I'm in college quite far away because I'm at the other side of Leeds. It takes forever to get there, and if buses are late, I'm late for college for about an hour because it's an hour between each bus.
Well, I mean, I think the money should go more into like the NHS and schools and that, just because it's like education's horrible around here. I can't deal with it because you know, obviously HS2 it's supposed to like get rid of the north-south divide, but it's not really doing all for it because no one really goes down London from here anyway.
Actually, it's very good. I feel very fortunate and I feel very lucky in that we have a bus stop just outside our front door, and I can get a bus sort of every 15 minutes, 20 minutes at the most. And going back home, it's the same. So I have no complaints at all.
So that's the view from people here in Leeds, and people in the north certainly now will be looking to see whether Rishi Sunak and his government can truly deliver on these promises to bridge that north-south divide and to make that levelling up promise come true.
Well, Anna, thank you for taking us back to the future and spotting that the tram network was last seen there in 1959. Good bit of local history. Thank you very much indeed. What about the future for those delegates leaving Manchester on their way home from the conference? Because there's major disruption at Manchester Piccadilly. The train drivers, of course, ASLEF, are on the picket lines in their ongoing dispute over pay and conditions.
Yes, drivers from 16 train companies are on strike, with many parts of the country having no services at all today. And those that are running have started later and are finishing earlier than usual. Our GB News national reporter Jack Carson is outside Manchester Piccadilly station for us. And Jack, it does sound like the train drivers are in the mood to say, we are going to keep doing this until we get a resolution that suits us.
Yeah, well, they're very much standing firm, and that was certainly the feeling on the picket line this morning. They were all out there with their flags, with their posters, very much showing how united they are still in this want and in this fight, of course, for those better pay, for those better working conditions as well. Even if it does mean, of course, bringing so much of the network to a standstill. That's particularly the impact that it has had here at Manchester Piccadilly. Of course, all those Conservative Party conference delegates trying to leave will not be able to use these railway services unless, of course, they might be a Welsh Conservative, in which case, with Transport for Wales being the only service here running from the station today, they can get back to Cardiff all right this afternoon, or maybe even a little bit of diversion, of course, for those people travelling from England. So there is a long way round maybe on the rail network to get back into England, but a lot of them are going to have to be using the roads and using, of course, the highways, and maybe if you're the Chancellor, like he did when he arrived, of course, his own plane as well. But of course, that big announcement from Rishi Sunak today on cancelling the second leg of HS2, which would of course come all the way here to Manchester. I've been speaking to people on the streets here today to find out what they make of that decision.
The line needs to be kept open because obviously they've invested so much billions in the infrastructure to get that line up and running. The problem you have, and we see this time and time again, whichever government's in power, the people that are doing the HS2 and the HS1 and all the other infrastructures are private companies. They want as much profit for as little amount of work as they could possibly get. What about the fact that that money's being wasted? That money could go on better and bigger projects. maybe building more affordable housing for people.
I think it's really, really bad. I think all the wealth is going down to London, and all the people in London are getting rich, and the people in the north are getting poorer, and they need to level up properly, and they need to keep that line going. Why waste all that money starting something when they should finish it off? And I think it's a disgrace, actually, and I think they just want to keep them rich down there and us poor up here. And why are you coming to Manchester for? Because at the end of the day, people in Manchester don't want you, and really your Conservative government shouldn't be in government at all.
It's ridiculous. I mean, we have more strikes and soft mick at the moment, and trains are essential. I don't think you should do that because it's penalising the north yet again, and we've got to have good rail services. They've done the rest of it over budget, so what's the difference?
Well, Jack, thanks very much indeed for bringing us there the voices of Manchester and, of course, all those delegates now trying to get their way home. Let's just reflect Mick Whelan of ASLEF indicating that the sooner that Rishi Sunak takes his helicopter home, the last chopper out of Saigon, the better for Britain. More reaction coming up. Let's get all the latest headlines now with Rhiannon.
It's 2:33, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has announced the scrapping of the Birmingham to Manchester leg of HS2. Speaking after weeks of speculation, Rishi Sunak told the Conservative Party conference in Manchester that he's taken the decision other leaders should have taken.
We will reinvest every single penny, £36 billion, in hundreds of new transport projects in the North and the Midlands across the country. This means £36 billion of investment in the projects that will make a real difference across our nation.
The Countess of Chester Hospital is under investigation for corporate manslaughter. It follows Lucy Letby's murder convictions. The former nurse jailed for life after killing 7 babies and attempting to murder 6 others at the hospital's neonatal unit. Cheshire Constabulary confirmed it's focusing on the indictment period between June 2015 and 2016. It says it's considering areas including senior leadership and decision-making to determine whether any criminality has taken place. A murder investigation has been launched after a dog believed to be an XL bully killed a man in Sunderland. Police responded just before 7 o'clock last night following reports a dog had injured a 54-year-old. A 44-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder. The dog was destroyed at the scene. A second has been seized. And in some breaking news, GB News has sacked Lawrence Fox and Calvin Robinson. They were both suspended last week after the actor turned politician made on-air comments about journalist Ava Evans. In a separate development today, the Reclaim Party leader was arrested shortly after he posted a video on social media saying his house was being searched by police. In a statement, Scotland Yard said a 45-year-old man is being questioned on suspicion to commit criminal damage to ULEZ cameras. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2171 and €1.1565. The price of gold is £1,501.35 per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,454 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Live Desk. More now from that speech from the Prime Minister at the closing of the Tory party conference, with Rishi Sunak reiterating that promise to stop the boats and clamp down on illegal migration. He said that although the government was making progress, there was more to be done.
Many people begin their European crossing at the small Italian island of Lampedusa, which has become the front line of the migrant crisis, from where our Home and Security editor Mark White sent this special report.
A week after more than 11,000 migrants arrived on this tiny Italian island, we watched as the final batch of 101, mainly young men from sub-Saharan Africa, left to board a ferry to the Italian mainland. Authorities here took advantage of several days of bad weather in the Med to clear the decks ahead of the next surge of migrant arrivals. It is a seemingly never-ending cycle in the mass movement of people across this sea. Lampedusa's geographical location, closer to North Africa than Italy, puts it on the front line of Europe's growing migrant crisis. But many of the 6,000 residents here say they feel forgotten, overwhelmed by the constant arrivals, with little concrete action from Europe's politicians. The Italian Red Cross run the main migrant reception centre on Lampedusa. They've been drafting in additional support to deal with the next surge in arrivals. The chaos of the last surge still fresh in their minds, where at one point 7,000 people were crammed into this compound, many clashing with police as they tried to leave. Serena Cornelia said the volunteers here felt powerless to help.
More difficult to give the support, but we try to give food, give kit, give psychological support and health support. So we have tried to take care of all the people inside the centre.
There are real concerns here on Lampedusa that the tourist trade, the lifeblood of this island community, could begin to dry up if a solution isn't found to the crisis. You don't have to look far for evidence of its impact here. Near the entrance to the port, a migrant boat lies beached on the rocks, a gaping hole in its hull. The personal belongings of its human cargo hanging over the sides. Inside the harbour, dozens of other migrant boats that made it here in recent days lie tied up, awaiting removal. Many still full of tire inner tubes, used by the migrants as makeshift life jackets. Further along the quayside, fishermen unload the last of their catch for local restaurants. The winds that have kept the migrant boats away for several days have also forced these fishermen back to port. Giacomo Migno says the migrant boats are severely impacting their livelihood.
So when we encounter a migrant boat, we call the authorities. They tell us to wait, not to do anything. Then the Coast Guard arrives, or the police patrol. But it means we're financially ruined. It's a mess. Our work is badly affected. It's too much.
Unlike the vast majority of African migrants who want to head to mainland Europe, Talla Diouf has made a life for himself here. The Senegalese national says the huge flow of fellow migrants onto this island is simply unsustainable.
The government must find a solution as quickly as possible because the island has 6,300 inhabitants. Then, if 11,000 of my brothers come, it's a big problem. We have to find a solution quickly because nothing will be done until next summer.
For now, these migrants are headed for the mainland. But this is not just an Italian problem, it's a Europe-wide crisis. Many here will eventually head north, some to the coast of northwest France and onto another boat, this time across the English Channel. Mark White, GB News on Lampedusa.
Mark updating us there on the front line of migration in that Italian island.
Bringing you a bit of breaking news about HS2 and it being axed north of Birmingham. That is what the Prime Minister revealed in his speech a little earlier. Plenty of speculation about whether the Mayor of Birmingham, Andy Street, would resign. Sorry, he's the Tory West Midlands Mayor. And he has said he will not. And what the Prime Minister has offered instead is a good compromise.
Yeah, he says, obviously, I'm very disappointed. I fought for it to be maintained. But remember, the line is going to run from Euston to Handsacre, where it will join the West Coast main line. So, compared to what could have happened, this is a good compromise position. That's his assessment.
And the Prime Minister did mention him a few times in his speech, didn't he?
Yeah. So we'll obviously get some more reaction from him. But Andy Burnham has been giving his reaction. Greater Manchester Mayor, this is what he's been saying.
In full to Leeds. And the reason why that's a problem is because if you ask anybody here, they will say that the bottleneck that we have in rail capacity in the centre of Manchester and the bottleneck on the other side of the Pennines in Leeds and the constrained capacity between the two cities is actually the single biggest thing that is holding back transport in the north. Because anybody who lives in this part of the world knows that you just will face disruption and overcrowding and inconvenience if you try and travel across the Pennines going anywhere from Liverpool to Newcastle or anywhere in between. So what has been announced today is not a solution to the east-west bottleneck that we face on the railways in the north. It does not deliver that new line. It involves patching up existing lines and leaving us with a problem that still has not been fixed. So it doesn't work east-west, but nor does it work north-south either. It does not make any logical sense to take HS2 trains up from London to Birmingham and then off HS2 onto the West Coast main line, which is already a heavily congested line and where the capacity doesn't exist. In fact, the argument for HS2 beyond Birmingham was always that it would deliver that extra capacity that would allow the railways to function properly. And people here know, the business community behind me will know, it's not just east-west where people can lose hours of their working week when making journeys. It can be north-south as well, because neither railway is as reliable as it needs to be for people here in the north of England, and particularly businesses who are making those frequent trips. So we haven't got a plan here that works north-south or east-west. That is not to say that there are not elements in this plan that provide some of what we need. The problem with it is it's a coherent plan that has been broken up and if you like, scattered around. What we have now got to do, myself and Bev, working with other northern mayors and leaders, to see if we can take what has been announced today and turn it back into a coherent plan for the north of England, and one, I hope, that will receive support from the opposition as well. So that's the job that's ahead of me as Mayor of Greater Manchester, and that's what we will be seeking to do. But it has been a highly frustrating week for us. It cannot be right that a project that we've all worked on together, and I speak for everybody behind me and with me, we've been at this for 15 years, where we've been working together across geography but also across the political divide to try and develop the right plan for the long-term best interests of our country. And we've put political differences aside, we've worked hard at it, and we've devoted a lot of time and a lot of energy to it. I don't see how you can take a plan that goes beyond the life of any individual government, or it goes beyond the interests of any one political party, given it goes all the way through the country, how you can kind of take that plan and basically tear it up at a party conference. Surely this should be done on a cross-party consultative basis, but we have not been consulted this week, a week when our city has done its best to play host to the government, and I'm proud of what we've done and the way in which the city has staged the conference, but I think we were entitled to better than what we've had. I think this city region was entitled to more respect than it's been given. We brought you here today to the first intercity railway station in the world. It was built almost 200 years ago when the first services started operating between Liverpool and Manchester, and we're proud, aren't we, that it's in our city region. We really did give passenger rail, commuter rail to the world, and that's a great thing. And you may remember almost 10 years ago, George Osborne came to, I think it was the building just beyond here, to kind of tap into that spirit that the north of England had in the 19th century of pioneering and bringing new developments to the world, to say that he would bring forward a northern powerhouse that would be all about that ambition again for Britain, building new north-south lines with HS2, east-west with HS3 as he called it then, but obviously became Northern Powerhouse Rail, new platforms at Piccadilly, you name it, we were getting it all. It's hard not to feel that 10 years on from that announcement, the Conservative Party have not shown the courage, the conviction or the capability to turn those statements into reality, to the great frustration of people here. And we don't say that in a party political sense, it's just where we've been, and we've been waiting and working to try and turn all of these things into a reality. You know, I hope that those statements weren't made 10 years ago just with political intentions in mind to try and win votes here, but it's starting to look very much like that's what it was all about. and what has been announced today feels something more of the same. Does this country have the will within it to actually prioritise the north of England and sort out its transport problems? Does this country have it within it to stop treating people here in the north as second-class citizens when it comes to transport and put them at the front of the queue rather than the back of the queue when it comes to investment? These are still open questions and they've not been answered by the Prime Minister today, but we will keep working as one Greater Manchester to make sure we get the right investment for the people here in our city region and across the north to ensure that we do what we can to turn this place into the powerhouse that we all know it can be in the future. Bev, I will hand over to you.
Thanks, Andy, and I think standing here as a collective group, hopefully this demonstrates that what's driving us is...
That was Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor there, with his reaction to what was announced at the conference centre, saying that they should have been done on a cross-party consultative basis. He said Manchester was entitled to better and entitled to more respect, indicating, of course, that the city had been hosting the conference, and basically he said that there had to be a more coherent plan for the north.
Yeah, he said the plans do not result in a solution for the bottleneck for the east and west of the country that railways face in the north, and it doesn't work north to south. He says it doesn't make any logical sense for HS2 to end in Birmingham and then to go onto the West Coast Main Line, which is already a heavily congested line. He says that the north should be at the front of the queue and not at the back of the queue when it comes to getting investment, but he, Andy Burnham and his team will keep working to get that investment for the north.
Yeah, he said it had been a highly frustrating week, and the project, they said they'd all been working together, indicating, of course, on a cross-party basis as well for some 15 years, many business leaders there in the city as well. In addition to that, of course, we were bringing you the reaction of the West Midlands Tory Mayor, Andy Street, who said he would not be resigning in protest at the axing of the northern leg of HS2, but he said he acknowledged he had lost the fundamental debate on HS2, indicating that on part of the Birmingham-Manchester bit, I'm not bluffing anybody, I lost that bit, but the debate was much broader. The debate was also about Euston, he said, and about where it finished in the Midlands, how it connected north. And we've heard today that other investment in the West Midlands, which we've separately been lobbying for, we have achieved that. So it's not 1-0, but I acknowledge the fundamental debate of this week I lost. 0-0 draw, maybe, who knows?
Yeah, well, there's plenty still to discuss on all this. Do stay with us here on GB News.
Good afternoon, I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a north-south split with the weather today. Wet for parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland, most of England and Wales dry under the influence of high pressure. Further north, weather fronts draping their way and bringing a soggy feel to much of central southern Scotland and the north of Northern Ireland. That rainy zone lingering well into the evening. Perhaps we'll see some wet weather into the far north of England. Much of northern Scotland actually turning dry and clear, and here it'll actually turn a little chilly with temperatures well down into single figures. For much of the rest of the UK, temperatures holding up in double digits. We start Thursday then with quite a lot of cloud, certainly for North Wales, northwest England. There'll be some outbreaks of rain and drizzle. For Northern Ireland, it's going to turn into a pretty soggy morning fairly quickly, the rain moving in here and then pushing into western Scotland as well. The winds will start to increase. So turning wet and windy across North Wales as well as northwest England. Northern Ireland actually turning a bit drier through the afternoon. Southern and eastern parts of England mostly dry and bright. A bit of sunshine could poke through, and that'll see temperatures up to 19 degrees. Elsewhere, we're in the mid-teens at best. Weather fronts continue to bring further rain across northwest